Hey guys, so if you are watching this because you are considering Narra Residences, chances are you've heard that Narra is the up-and-coming launch and future demand will outweigh supply, and that once nearby BTOs start MOPing, prices should move. But I'm pretty sure there's a reason why you're still out here looking for reviews to see if that's really the case. So that might sound logical, but only if we are very clear where that demand is actually coming from and when, because some important details are often left out. So this is not a hype video, it's also not a don't buy now video. My goal is very simple, it's just to provide you guys clarity. So by the end of this video, you'll understand what Narra does well, where the risks are, and how to think about entry price properly. So without further ado, let's go. Okay, so Narra Residences is a 99-year leasehold development located in Dairy Farm, District 23. So it's about 540 units with a very family-oriented unit mix. And the TOP is expected to be around Q1 2030. So this is a very nature-centric, quiet, lifestyle-focused project, and most importantly, this is not mass market or MRT-centric development, which means that it needs to be analysed differently. So preview dates are also set to be in about a week's time on the 16th and 17th of January. So very quickly on the developers, right, they are very strong developers with strong track record in Singapore, which means that the quality of your finishes, your facilities and landscaping will be assured to a certain standard. And what really matters is whether the developer can deliver what they planned on time and to standard. Okay, location-wise, Narra is surrounded by greenery, nature buffers and dairy farm mall nearby. But let's be clear, this is not a walk to MRT project as we all know, and buyers here are likely to choose lifestyle and environment over pure convenience. Okay, so facilities-wise, it's a very well thought out plan for 540 unit development with full-fledged facilities, and it's clearly designed for own-stay families in mind. And one thing to take note is that they do have a tennis court available as well, which is missing from a lot of the new developments nowadays. So the dairy farm reasoning that you've been told or likely have heard is that the past underperformance in the area was supply-driven, not location-driven. Upgraded demand was structurally weak in the last 2 to 3 years due to the insufficient HDB MOP units. And also this region relies heavily on local buyers, right, which also comes from the lack of HDB upgraders in terms of their MOP units. And of course, what we have also been hearing is that we will see a turning point when Narra Residences TOPs in 2030. So if you've been researching on Narra Residences and probably why you came across my video, you've probably come across a very common narrative that while Dairy Farm hasn't performed strongly in the past, the next phase is expected to be different. Okay, so the expectation is that upcoming HDB MOP supply will create fresh upgraded demand and that even a very conservative 10% of that demand will be more than sufficient to support prices and absorb the supply here when Narra Residences TOP. So on the surface, that sounds logical, but is that really the case? My job here today is to deep dive and break that down for you. Okay, so when I evaluate projects like these, I eventually run them through my CLEAR framework, CLEAR. But before that, we need to assess something fundamental, the demand story that most buyers are being told for Narra. Because if that story doesn't add up, and the way you look at pricing, strategy, and how buyers manage their risk tolerance will then have to change as well. And let's keep in mind that the CLEAR framework works as a system and not in isolation, and all 5 factors must be assessed together and not selectively. Okay, so in this part 1, I'll be sharing one of the factors as part of our CLEAR framework that looks at the quality of the supposed upgrader pipeline that Narra Residences will need to depend on 4 years later for their exit strategy. So we can see here that within the 1 to 3 km radius, Narra Residences, there's no meaningful HDB upgrader pipeline and demand within their TOP window at 2030. And demand comes from an extended radius of upgraders, minimally at the 4 km mark, which includes the Tengah and Bukit Batok clusters. So if we were to expand the radius, of course the numbers will increase. Additional demand will also come from landed downgraders and nature and lifestyle buyers, right? But let's not bank on these groups because we want to assess our purchases with as much predictability as possible and not guesswork. So, moral of the story is these buyers exist, but they don't behave like the usual mass upgrader demand, which means that pricing discipline matters more than the potential demand narrative. Okay, let's take a look at the exact comparison of Dairy Farm Residences, which TOP in 2024, to have a clearer understanding why it's moving so slowly at this point in time. So in the same narrative, there was no meaningful HDB MOP upgrader pipeline or demand within the 2 km radius back then as well when they TOP in 2024. But if we were to extend out the radius to a 4 km radius, then yes, of course we see Jalan Teck Whye, the Bukit Batok clusters that hit MOP back then. But the question that we want to ask ourselves right here is why is Dairy Farm Residences moving so slowly despite such huge clusters that hit MOP, which is supposedly supposed to absorb the supply like Narra Residences? So now for land bid and break even, this part is very important. So the site was bidded at 1,020 per square foot per plot ratio, which is 23.1% higher than the second bidder, Simlian. So one thing to take note is that we usually see a much tighter margin between the top two bidders for other projects. So paying more for land doesn't mean that the project is bad. It simply means that the developer was confident enough to pay a premium. But from a buyer's perspective, here's the key thing to understand. When the land is bought at a big premium, it doesn't mean that the project is bad. It just means that buyers like yourselves need to be more careful about your entry price. So developers don't sell at a break-even. On average, they have to target about 20 to 25% of a margin. So the average pricing is likely to move towards the 2004 to 2005 per square foot range. And that's why in the next slide, we will see that the starting prices of around 2,000 per square foot may indicate that the developers are not too much after their profit margin, but ultimately, we still need to keep in mind the entry price that you're entering with for any one of you out there who are planning to purchase at Narra Residences. Okay, so one interesting thing to take note is that for the larger units for other developments, it's usually priced more attractively to drive early momentum, but in Narra Residences itself, we can see that it's quite the opposite. Smaller units are priced more attractively, and this is likely due to the developers wanting to drive momentum as well. Okay, so next we have the projected price metrics, and I believe this is something that a lot of you are very interested in. So these are the estimated prices for the different unit types, and one thing to take note is that these are not official prices from the developer themselves, and these estimations are just for personal use only. Okay, so for unit mix itself, it explains a lot about who this project is meant for and who it isn't. So we do see a larger percentage for 3 to 4 bidders as compared to the 1 to 2 bidders here, 53% for the 3 and 4 bidders and 46% for the 1 and 2 bidders combined. Okay, so the good thing for this is that there's a 1-to-1 ratio for car park lots, as homeowners who buy here will likely be driving as we are not near the MRT stations. Okay, so layout-wise, I'll just breeze through because there's multiple types for the 2, 3 or even 4 bidders here, and I don't want to bore you with the layout so much because I know that's not what most of you are here for. So do reach out to us if you want us to assess what's the most suitable layout for you depending on your requirements and intention of purchase. Okay, so 2 bidders here appeal mainly to price-sensitive buyers because it's at a very, very attractive quantum. So for the 3 bidders, they are the core upgraded product, and just one recommendation if I can give you here is if you can go for the larger unit types. So in part 2 of my review, I'll be going through in depth on my clear framework on why you should go for the larger unit types if you can, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so in part 2, I'll run Narra fully through my clear framework, what is the expected upgraded demand, and whether the supply is truly going to be absorbed. What is the current resale pricing gaps and after costing net gains that you are expecting to have. And of course, our resale exit liquidity, what does it look like? So that's where we decide who Narra actually works for and who it doesn't. So at this point in time, you should have a clearer picture of what Narra Residences is and what it isn't. And we've looked at the project itself, the entire demand narrative that's often repeated out there, and the pricing context behind the launch itself. So what this tells us is very simple. Narra Residences isn't a hype-driven project, and it doesn't benefit from immediate and mass market demand, which means that the outcomes here depend less on stories, but more on how carefully of a price point you enter with. So in part 2, I'll run Narra fully through my clear framework, and that's where we stress test the churn and absorption rate, the real demand, resale pricing gaps, after costing returns, and resale exit, and decide very clearly who this project works for and who it doesn't. So if you are still watching at this point, part 2 is where the real deep diving and decision guiding happens, and I'll see you there.